Welcome to Salaal Geographia. This is the Decolonial Readers series. I'm your host, Aaron Samar. We're going to have a look at a series of readings that might help you with your teaching practice, especially geography teachers when they're looking into decolonizing the curriculum or looking for ways in which to understand anti-racism and how they can implement this in the classroom. So our first reading for today is the very first chapter, so chapter 1 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire's most famous book. And we're going to have a look at the different themes that come about and might be able to speak to you as well as a teacher. You could be a humanities teacher, like history or geography, or even an English teacher or another subject that is looking into decolonizing the curriculum. Now, a lot of decolonial thought comes from Paulo Freire, so it's really important to understand aspects of this particular book. I know it's influenced me in very positive ways, especially because, growing up in England with predominantly white British teachers, just for context, my own heritage is Pakistani and I'm a Muslim, so obviously my teachers were, well, they didn't look like me and they didn't have a similar culture to me, and it was very rare to see a teacher from my particular heritage. But that said, it was a very different time, and things have evolved and shaped since. But I would say, to make things easier, this book would be really beneficial for teachers who want to kind of understand why a student might feel oppressed in the classroom for whatever reason. I know with me and my own personal experience, I felt some sort of oppression due to my heritage, both being Pakistani and being Muslim. So I'm kind of thinking of ways to help teachers combat this feeling and maybe build those bridges between themselves and their students. And I find that this book really does help in that. So let's just get straight into what this book is about, or this particular first chapter. Approach the very first chapter. There's going to be a couple of key terms that are going to spring out to you, so it's really important to just make a note of what they are, and I've done that here for you. Obviously, you can make your own notes as you read this chapter. So in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, there were several new terms which I found really interesting and central to Freire's pedagogical philosophy. And apologies if I'm saying his name wrong. I'll use the term Freire, but some people, I think, pronounce it Freire. But I need to investigate what the true pronunciation is. So if you are aware of how to pronounce his name properly, if you could please write it in the comments below so that I can sort of reshape how I say his name. Remember, this is a great philosopher. I've learned so much from him, so a lot of respect for him. So some of these terms, like one of them is banking education. So this kind of refers to the traditional model of education. So this is where students are kind of viewed as a passive recipient or recipients of knowledge. So it's like similar to the bank accounts where information is deposited to the student. The second concept that came out to me was problem posing education, and this kind of contrasts with the banking education system. It emphasizes the participatory learning process where students and teachers engage in a dialogue, and this kind of fosters critical thinking and reflection. And more recently, I've been sort of privileged enough to engage with critical thought in some of the postgraduate teaching that I've been engaged in. And I realized that a lot of it is relevant to secondary education as well. This idea of getting students to think critically and reflect on that thinking as well, critically. So that leads us to critical consciousness. And this term describes the ability to analyze the social, political, and economic contradictions in one's environment. Now, there's so much going on in this world, and geographically, we do think socially, politically, and economically, but also environmentally as well. So, bringing all that together and having a critical consciousness is very important, because it leads to awareness and action for social transformation, and deciding what that transformation might be depends on what the current issues are in the world and what issues you choose to discuss with your students. Found in this book, I would say, and the very first chapter. So this idea of dialogue being like a fundamental concept, and it refers to the interactive process between teachers and students. So knowledge is co-constructed through mutual respect and understanding, where you might have a student who tells you a little bit about their heritage, and you and the rest of the class just sit there and listen to this knowledge being disseminated in your classroom for that moment. And I know I've talked about it in some of my other talks, this idea of learning from your students through their personal geographies and what they've been through, and maybe their holidays, but not just holidays, but their actual interaction with their dual or their intersectional being or identities. So them sharing that with you through dialogue is very important. So Freire sees this dialogue as essential for authentic learning and critical engagement with the world, because obviously they're going to be exposed to social media, the students, and you're going to be exposed to social media. So how you talk about what you see is quite critical in the classroom, because it's only through dialogue that you're able to understand their world as students, and share your world as their teacher, and come together and have that discussion, especially when talking about things such as race and racism, and places which are considered places of conflict within geography education. So then this word oppression is probably the most critical term that's used in the book. And, you know, it's very important for us to understand and dismantle what we mean by oppression, because obviously oppression is going to mean different things to different people, and it can be understood in different contexts as well. So this term is used to describe the systems and structures that inhibit individuals' abilities to act freely and participate fully in society. So it's like when someone feels like they're a part of a racist society, it means they're essentially oppressed in that society, because they can't function freely. They can't do as people of privilege can do. Like, for example, in England, you have the white privilege. So if you are black or brown, global majority, you by default do not have the privilege of somebody who is white. And I mean, this is not really up for discussion, in the sense that, you know, whether this exists or doesn't exist. The concept that we're addressing here is the one of oppression. So if I give my own kind of positionality on this, being brown in a white space is sometimes very oppressive, because when you walk in, you automatically start questioning your own identity and you start feeling a little bit subordinate. And it takes a lot of courage to sort of overcome this and you know, tell yourself, look, no, I'm equal. I'm an equal human being, and I'm going to speak from that perspective. I'm not going to make myself lesser than the people in the room. But the fact that I'm even thinking this shows that I'm in some sort of oppressive society or oppressive situation. Yeah, so then after acknowledging there's an oppression comes this idea of liberation. So Paulo Freire talks about liberation as well. And this concept refers to the process of becoming empowered to challenge and change oppressive structures and conditions in society, which Freire sees as a goal of education. So liberation through education is key to this piece of work. So definitely it speaks to my own research, which is looking into decolonizing geography, but also more widely. Okay, so we've looked at the different key terms that Freire uses, and now we're going to look at the sort of nuanced understanding of oppression in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And there's several key points that I'm going to highlight today. One of them is complexity in the nature of oppression. So Freire asserts that oppression can't be understood through a single lens, such as class alone. So there's an element of intersectionality in this, because there's so many different protected characteristics that you could consider here that could cause oppression in the classroom. So instead, he advocates for a sort of like a convergent theoretical framework that includes various intersecting factors such as race, gender, culture, language, and ethnicity. This perspective recognizes that oppression is sort of complex and multi-dimensional, and it affects individuals in diverse ways. So, for example, I've worked in schools, like faith schools, like Christian faith schools, and a Hindu faith school, a Sikh faith school as well, and also a Muslim faith school. And being Muslim myself, it's interesting because when you teach in a different faith to your own, it's very important your relationship with the students needs some of the things that we've talked about, that Paulo Freire has mentioned, things like understanding how you could be oppressive with that person with the knowledge coming to the class and having that authority, how you treat the students in front of you, and how you treat their beliefs and how you treat their heritage, and you know, whether you give space to dialogue and some of the things that we've mentioned. So what Paulo Freire talks about here is also this idea of understanding that there's going to be difference within the classroom. So you know, there's lots of things that you can consider, and he's mentioned a few of them here, a few of the personal characteristics, which are very important to kind of take heed of when you do meet your classroom and teach. So if we move on to oppressor versus oppressed, Freire talks about there's a like a really fine line between, you know, the oppressor and oppressed, and sometimes it's important to understand the dynamics of oppression, and in explaining the oppressors benefiting from maintaining that status quo while the oppressed are being marginalized and being made to feel voiceless. I mean, for a teacher, it's very easy to kind of do that, especially when your curriculum is predominantly white and colonial. It's very easy to kind of reproduce that kind of mentality in the classroom. So the question is, what do you do to kind of alleviate that and move away from this oppressor versus oppressed kind of situation. So according to Freire, it's essential to acknowledge these roles since they inform the strategies for liberation. So the idea is to liberate your classroom and to kind of empower your students. So the another key point is social construction of reality, and he argues that the conditions that lead to oppression are socially constructed, meaning that they're created and maintained by societal structures and relationships rather than being natural or inevitable. I mean, it's not just natural to feel oppressed. I mean, someone is oppressing you. That's why you might feel oppressed. So that kind of is explained here. So it's really important. I'm just looking through some of my notes as well, where Paulo Freire talks about how the oppressor doesn't want to give up their role as the oppressor. So essentially the oppressed has a different reality to the oppressor. And the oppressed might feel like, oh, I'm just in this situation, so I'm just going to accept it. So then the role becomes quite serious for the oppressor, because then the question is going to arise, like, do they just carry on oppressing, or do they stop doing it? And then he actually speaks to that as well, of what you can do in that instance. But here he emphasizes the need to recognize the phenomena such as poverty or hunger as socially engineered rather than simply being personal failures. And this idea of, it's not the student's or the child's fault that they are from a socially sort of not well off economic background. So, it's not their fault. But again, it's part of the societal construct that they are in this situation where they are not well off. And then when they come to the classroom, they might get judged on that. So then this idea of critical consciousness, Freire promotes the idea of developing critical consciousness amongst the oppressed, which involves recognizing their own situation and understanding the causes of their oppression and cultivating the ability to act against these conditions, like not just accepting that I'm poor and I'm from this background, but understanding why am I poor, how did I get to this, why, like for example with me, I used to wonder, why is there racism, what started the racism, why the Pakistani families subjected to this kind of treatment, and thinking about what some of the reasons are for this. He encourages education as a means of fostering this consciousness to empower individuals to enact social change. So the social change is going to come within that community that's feeling oppressed. So explore ways to combat it. And this dialogue kind of helps in the process of becoming aware and kind of rejecting these oppressive structures and beginning to kind of move away from that. He also talks about ethical responsibility. So he emphasizes the necessity for educators and individuals to have political clarity and ethical responsibility in their teaching practice. And he argues for an interventionist stance where educators actively kind of support the oppressed in recognizing and challenging the structures of their oppression, rather than adopting a neutral or non-directive approach. So often we see in curriculum changes, there's this overarching move to have a curriculum taught in a certain way. But here, what is being said is that the people in power need to actually think about the oppression that they're causing as well, and take heed of that. what we've seen now is Freire deepens our understanding of oppression, and he fosters a foundation for transformative educational approach, and this is aimed at liberation and social justice, and it takes into consideration the different intersectional protected characteristics that the student may have. So it's really important to take heed of some of the things that Paulo Freire talks about in terms of the teacher and student relationship, where if the teacher is oppressing the student, that teacher thinks about it and does something about it. And also there's a responsibility on the person being oppressed, that they also acknowledge that an oppression is taking place, and for them to consciously do something about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed in the context of understanding decoloniality in geography. And we're going to look at it through some key concepts. For example, when we're critiquing dominant narratives, Freire emphasizes on critiquing these dominant narratives, and the idea of decoloniality as it seeks to challenge Eurocentric perspectives in geography. And we could do this by encouraging critical thinking. So Freire's pedagogy enables learners to integrate the historical and contemporary ways in which knowledge about different geographies has been constructed, and often serves to marginalize indigenous and local perspectives, and also other heritages outside the Western European or white context, so the global South, and the way in which the global South is portrayed, like talking about different religions and how they're portrayed in the West. And this brings me to this idea of empowerment of marginalized voices. Freire advocates for giving a voice to the oppressed, which aligns with decolonial efforts to center indigenous knowledge systems and experiences in geographic discourse. His focus on dialogue supports the idea that geography education should incorporate the perspectives and lived experience of historically marginalized communities, allowing for a more inclusive and equitable understanding of space and place. And then you've got this critical consciousness and agency, where the development of critical consciousness is central to both Freire's pedagogy and decolonial thought. Freire emphasizes the importance of individuals recognizing their oppressed condition and gaining agency to act against them. In geography, this means empowering learners to understand the spatial dimensions of their oppression and to engage in actions that change colonial legacies and injustices within their own locals. So what this is kind of saying is that, it's that same idea of when a student sees their own country of heritage portrayed in the geography textbook, through dialogue we can actually begin to listen to our students and see how they're feeling, and seeing what suggestions they come up with, and also exploring geographies with them, their personal geographies, their geographies of heritage, and sort of allowing for that kind of dialogical practice to take place, if that makes sense. For me, Freire's ideas offer very valuable frameworks for understanding and implementing decolonial approaches in geography by promoting critical thinking, inclusivity, and social justice, all of which are essential for addressing legacies of colonialism within the geographic discipline. And there are some really important points that we can discuss here, like, for example, understanding location and context. So Freire's argument that knowledge is rooted in context. It kind of resonates with decolonial approaches that stress the importance of local knowledge by recognizing the unique histories, culture, and geographies of communities. Educators can kind of establish a more relevant and critical geographic education that reflects the realities of diverse peoples and challenges hegemonic views. So it's really important to, have that discussion in the classroom, and bring those critical geographies into the classroom, so students can see the plurality of geography as a discipline. Coming back to the dialogical education, Freire's model of dialogical education promotes active engagement and co-learning amongst students and teachers, and this approach kind of aligns with decolonial methodologies that advocate for collaborative, participatory, and reflexive learning. In geography, this would involve working alongside communities to co-create knowledge that respects their realities and contributes to their self-determined development. This idea of actually reaching out to communities and learning from communities. Ethics and responsibility. Freire emphasizes ethical responsibility in education about oppression, which can extend to decolonial critique of how geography as a discipline has historically kind of served colonial agendas, and a lot of the societies and associations were built on these colonial legacies and have key colonist figures that are founders, like Mackinder is one of the founding members of the Geographical Association, and obviously the Royal Geographical Society has a very strong colonial past as well. So educators can use Freire's work to reflect on their own positionalities and responsibilities in teaching, in ways that actively contribute to decolonial goals and social justice, and really delve into the history of the subject. Thank you very much for joining us at Salaal Geographia for the Decolonial Readers series. We'll be looking at another reading next week, so every Wednesday hopefully we will be posting a new reading for you to consider. Until next time, thank you very much. Peace.